Okay. All right, it's 2:02. We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone. My name is Michael Del Rosa, and I will be opening up our workshop today, and then we'll be handing off to the project team to carry you all through a productive conversation and discussion. So thank you for joining us in the second round of our food system and circular economy working group. I do want to note that we are recording this meeting, which will be posted to our engagement site and may be used for public viewing. Before we get into welcome remarks, I do want to note that we will be providing language translation for today's meeting. Everyone will need to choose a language, the language that you prefer to listen to the meeting in. So everyone must select a language, even if it is English. Let's please take a moment to have everyone select their language. I'd like to introduce our interpreter, Giovanna. She's going to explain our Spanish and English language features that we have available for the workshop today. Giovanna, can you unmute yourself and please tell us about those features?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Giovanna Wormsbecker, and I'll be your Spanish interpreter during this meeting. In order to provide language access, this meeting will have simultaneous interpretation from English to Spanish. Please note that the translation globe will not appear until after I've read through all language instructions. Therefore, we're asking that everyone joining us for this event, please select your preferred language to facilitate hearing presenters and participants clearly. If you're on a laptop or a desktop, you will see a globe at the bottom right of your screen. Please click on the globe icon that says interpretation and select English. If you're on an iPad or a similar device, then locate the three-dot menu on the upper right and select language interpretation. Then select English. When it's your turn to speak, please remember to be loud and clear and speak at a moderate pace, as the interpreter will be interpreting simultaneously into the other language. Buenas tardes a todos, me llamo Giovanna Wormsbecker y voy a ser su intérprete en español durante esta reunión. Esta reunión contará con interpretación simultánea bidireccional del inglés al español. El globo de traducción no va a aparecer hasta que se haya leído todas las instrucciones en los dos idiomas. Por lo tanto, pedimos que todos los presentes seleccionen su idioma preferido para facilitar escuchar a los presentadores y participantes con claridad. Si está utilizando una computadora, verá un icono en la parte inferior de su pantalla a la derecha en forma de globo que dice Interpretación. Haga clic ahí y seleccione Español. Si está utilizando un iPad o su teléfono, localice el menú de 3 puntos que aparece arriba a la derecha, haga clic en Interpretación de idiomas y elija Español. Cuando sea su turno de hablar, por favor recuerde hablar con voz fuerte y clara y a un paso moderado, ya que el intérprete estará interpretando simultáneamente al otro idioma. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Giovanna. Let's go ahead and initiate that globe so we can everyone can choose their language. So please choose your language, and again, you must choose a language. We appreciate that. Great. So we'll be using a variety of methods to hear from you today. You will have the same features whether you are joining from your computer or cell phone. Please type in your thoughts using the chat feature. This is located at the bottom of your screen. If you're joining by cell, select the 3 dots at the lower right of your screen. If you would like to speak over the audio, please use the raise your hand option, also located at the bottom of your screen. If you are calling in, please enter *9. Additionally, we will pause in between our speakers to ask you questions and hear your thoughts. The majority of time will be focused on hearing your comments and questions the best we can. Here are those same features, but from a mobile view for anyone who may be joining from their mobile devices through the Zoom app. If you select more on the bottom taskbar in Zoom, you will see the options to chat. Select your language of choice and raise your hand to indicate you would like to speak. So there you go, for taking the time to listen to these features. So again, my name is Michael Del Rosa, and I'm part of the project team that the County of San Diego Land Use Environment Group has formed to help move forward in developing the regional decarbonization framework. Today, you will also hear from Murtaza Baximusa, the Program Manager for the Regional Sustainability and Land Use Environment Group Executive Office, including Scott Anders, the Director of Energy and Policy Initiatives at the Energy and Policy Initiative Center at the University of San Diego. We also have We also have a few short presentations prepared for you by San Diego State University, the San Diego Food System Alliance, and the San Diego Farm Bureau. Before we get started, I'd like to take a minute to just set the stage for how these working groups are structured and how our agenda for the day, and also remind you that we are going to continue to use the Engage platform to post our working group documents and recordings for your review. And as a quick note, we were made aware that there's an error for people who are trying to comment. However, our IT team is working on that, and it should be back up soon, if not already. In the meantime, people can still leave comments underneath the document. If you have any questions on registering to the site, accessing your working group documents, please send us an email and we will help you through that. As some of you may know, for those who are joining us for the first time, we have set up 5 special topic working groups to focus on key emitting sectors and solutions for addressing climate change. These will categorize and guide the development of the implementation playbook with a draft ready by the end of the year. For today's agenda, we'll begin with the 3 invited guests: Allie Brown from the San Diego Food System Alliance, Mary Mutava, and Katie Barn from the San Diego Farm Bureau, and a guest from San Diego State University. After your presentation, our consultant, Scott Anders from the Energy Policy Initiative Center at USD, will discuss their approach to the implementation playbook and the draft matrix of decarbonization actions for the food system and circular economy sector. Mirza will then facilitate an open discussion where we would like to hear from all of you. With that, I will hand it over to Mirza to introduce our first speaker. Mirza.
Thanks, Michael. So we have a new and exciting approach to getting input into the development of our implementation strategy. We have heard that there are many stakeholders and experts that have given considerable thought to the plans, programs, and pilots to begin implementing decarbonization in our region. So we want to gather these ideas. We want to learn from the knowledge that is out there in the community and in other parts of the country and the world, so we can focus on action. The focus of this workshop, where we have flipped the roles such that stakeholders present and the government listens, is a pilot of our own. So I hope that you will come along with us in this journey to explore new ways of public outreach. If this is successful, we will be building an online repository of ideas or an ideas bank with 5 to 7 minute presentations followed by questions from the moderator. That would be me. Today, I understand that we have 3 presentations. These may not be fully comprehensive to cover the vast expanse of the circular economy, but this is the beginning. So first up, we have a presentation from Ellie Brown. Ellie is the co-executive director of the San Diego Food System Alliance. The Alliance is a diverse and inclusive network that works across sectors to promote collaboration, influence policy, and catalyze transformation in the food system. Previous to the Alliance, Ellie has worked in a variety of roles, including consulting and financial services. Thank you for joining us, Ellie. Queen is yours.
Thank you, Murtaza. Thank you for this opportunity to talk about food system issues in the context of our work through the Alliance and the San Diego County Food Vision 2030 that was created through a 2-year participatory process. Next slide. Really, I think the reason why we're working on the issue of food system is because it's a crucial system in our society. By uplifting the system thoughtfully, really, and deciding how we grow the food, how we move the food, how we share food and think about food, really will change all societal systems and how we relate to each other and the planet. Because really, at the end of the day, systems are all really about relationships between people. So really examining this system of food will enable us to transform all societal systems. And next slide is a little bit about the vision. It was created through a 2-year participatory process. We engaged with communities across the food system, particularly low-income neighborhoods across San Diego County, tribal communities, farmers, fishermen, food workers, farm workers, small food businesses that are owned by immigrants, and really engaging them in this process. And the next step, the next slide is really about why we did it. A little bit of background and context that we have a lot of assets in this region. We have many small farms. We have a diversity of retailers and restaurants. We have a year-round growing season. We have an active fishing community. We have a community of nonprofits doing a lot of work in this space. But really, the next slide challenges are very similar to many the challenges that we see across the country in both rural and urban issues, viability issues tied to the cost of land, water, labor, market forces, culture of waste, impact of climate and across the supply chain, issues around workers and communities of color. This is what we see in the current country and context. Because of our industrialized system and the dominant economic system that we've created. So the next slide is really a connection food system to the climate. So according to the UN, our industrialized food system is the biggest culprit for climate change. When we look globally, we waste a lot. We really are not very thoughtful when it comes to industrial agriculture. So really, food is fundamental and clearly what we need to survive. And the only solution really is to invest in relocalizing our food system, reconnecting our relationships within it. So the next slide is basically the 3 goals of Food Vision 2030 that was created after a 2-year process. So cultivating justice, ensuring that we're really looking at equity issues across the food system, fighting climate change, because the food system, industrialized food system is the biggest culprit for climate change, but on the flip side, a more regionalized regenerative system is the most impactful solution to climate change. And also the food system is very vulnerable to climate. Lastly, resilience. We saw a lot of disruptions during the pandemic, supply chains breaking down. We want to leverage our local assets, create a more adaptive, nimble food system that can withstand future disasters. So the next set of slides are really the 10 objectives around Food Vision 2030. Again, created through input of communities that was engaged through this process, over 3,000 individuals, over 250 organizations. And the 10 objectives are input from the community, and also the most impactful objectives that'll help achieve the 3 goals. So these really ranging from supporting our local farmers to contribute to climate change, as well as really ensuring that local products stay local, elevating wages and working conditions. And the next set of slides are really around supporting access to healthy food for urban communities, urban and rural communities, and ensuring that we're not wasting anything in the system and investing in recycling infrastructure. The last 3 are really around gelling as a movement, bringing all the stakeholders together, making sure that we're really looking into the future for next generations to come. So, that's sort of the vision in a nutshell. And the next slide is just kind of highlights on what I wanted to point out as it relates to decarbonization. At the highest level, the recommendation for us is to create supportive policy environments and invest in all strategies aligned with Food Vision 2030 that I just shared with you. And this vision can be observed on sdfoodvision2030.org. But really, a couple of the highlights, a couple of the things that I wanted to highlight. So relocalizing the food system will allow us to bring San Diegans closer to our seasonally available food sources. Food Shed Bayas here, and they have a great model that's connecting San Diegans to food sources here locally. Shifting public-owned land for community use control ownership. That's another really important opportunity. Nurturing the next generation of food producers, farmers, and fishermen to ensure we have them here. Many of them, the average age is very up there. So we want to make sure that we can support the next generation of food producers. Investing in carbon farming and really looking at various different ways to finance that. Building soil health, centering the needs and viability of farmers above all else. Eliminating waste through infrastructure investments, but also as a concept to make sure that we invest in culture shift interventions so that we're not wasting so much. And honoring and elevating traditional ecological knowledge, acknowledging the harm, and building relationships with Indigenous communities is also important in that. So these are really kind of some of the top areas to highlight for me through the Food Vision 2030. And the next slide, the last slide, is really that, I'm sorry, I'll be the second to the last. What feels important also is to ensure that we are doing some deep listening to the work that's already underway. And this is a presentation from Foodshed on the data that's been collected from the farmers around their carbon sink incentive work. It's really impressive to see the results. So we need to really be nimble and use the data that we have in this region. Lastly, since the framework, the regional decarbonization framework is really encouraging us to look beyond our existing constraints of government processes, I would really like to encourage this group to be transformative in our thinking. How can we be adaptive and nimble as we think about this work? How can we really bypass the layers of unnecessary bureaucracy at this time? How can we bypass the short-term politics and power structures that often inhibit this work? What's our collective accountability for this earth and future generations? And when 2030 comes, will we be proud of our relationships with each other and earth? I think these are really important questions for us to ponder on as we do this work together. So that's it. And then closing, San Diego Food System Alliance has a free membership program now. So you can all join this membership program through sdfsa.org and also check out the vision report fully through this website.
Thank you so much, Ali. Appreciate your presentation on the San Diego County Food Vision 2030. And now with the data you gathered, you have this vision, you are also kind of embarking on this journey towards implementation in the same way as we want to, through decarbonization, also begin this journey on decarbonization. So I wanted to ask if you would like to highlight any specific ideas or suggestions for action on decarbonizing the food system locally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so as I mentioned in the previous slide around the recommendations, really creating a supportive policy environment and investing in these strategies is what's needed here. But creating a supportive policy environment involves public agencies, and that's the county and all cities and various different public agencies that also exist in this region to simplify, streamline, humanize these processes to support food entrepreneurs and food projects in the community. And that I'm talking about the entire supply chain. And create incentive mechanisms for people to transition into this way of existing, which is really the relocalizing aspect of it. And especially because the dominant economic system is pulling us away from that. So we need a lot of incentives to enable us to behave in this way, like local food incentives or procurement, infrastructure investments, pooling funding, integrated capital for carbon farming, fully leveraging federal meal programs like SNAP and WIC to invest in low-income communities for their ability to access local healthy food, and culture shift interventions. Being able to really take a holistic approach, supportive policy environment and investments. But I think the bigger idea really that I wanted to put out there, and the last slide was about, is perhaps, I think we can shift our dominant economic system and governing bodies that influence our regional food system. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's not like one policy solution. I think it feels like where we need to head is a more right-sized approach to governing the food system, one that is more at the bioregional level. And I mentioned this big idea because where else should I talk about these ideas outside of a decarbonization framework that's looking beyond one jurisdiction? And in a bioregional governance body that's centered on the needs of the communities across the food system, focused on equity and redistributing taxpayer dollars collected in the dominant economic system to bring more justice into the system so that farmers are thriving, fishermen are thriving, communities are thriving, workers are thriving. And we have to redistribute the money until we get to a place where a regionalized, equitable, and sustainable food system is a norm in this bioregion, in every community. So we need to think a little bit outside of the box, I think.
Thank you, Ali. Wanted to ask you, you talked about the supply chain, you mentioned the workers, from farm workers and fishermen to transportation and warehousing, and then of course retail sales. So this entire chain of workers, and particularly you also mentioned communities of color. Are there any gaps in our knowledge base, in partly in addressing a lot of historical injustices of the past, and either in case studies of our region that we can learn from, or from outside the region that we can borrow from?
Mhm. Yeah, in the Food Vision 2030 report, we outline strategies and case studies, examples from other regions. So definitely please check those out. In the United States, you know, the urban areas like Boston, Portland, Seattle, they seem to have more supportive urban food environments because cities are stepping up. And there's also rural communities like Vermont that seem to be better at relocalizing their food system and supporting local food processors and farmers, et cetera. But you know, it's very difficult in this current in the country and in the federal policies and environment that's been created. I think in other countries like Europe, particularly, it just feels a little bit more right size. I grew up in Japan, and you know, we learned about you know, we had a food education as part of a classroom curriculum, and we learned about seasonality, nutrition, where our food comes from, and building those relationships and local farmers. So I think keeping things more regional is the way to go, and not have it be so top down.
Thank you, Ellie. And one last question about regional. You also talked about deep listening. So as a region, how could we bring together, if you have any thoughts on how the county can convene some of these different sectors in the circular economy?
Yes. Well, first and foremost, county should definitely be working to themselves, and also bringing the cities together to better plan together and create supportive policy environments and invest in projects and solutions on the ground. Like, that's first and foremost. County as a convening body in some ways can be a little challenging, I think, because it's still stuck in that current culture and systems that we're actually trying to push against. Even when there are progressive elected officials, there seems to be something stuck there. So I think as a convening body, there's going to be some challenges to be adaptive and kind of bypass that. So I'm still kind of like processing how that's actually going to work. But as long as we can continue to have conversations about what that looks like, then I think we can get there.
Thank you so much, Ellie. And with that, we will continue the conversation about food by bringing in Mary Maratava and Katie Byrne. Mary is the president of the San Diego County Farm Bureau and grows avocados and coffee in North County. She's also the owner of Agri Service, which processes over 100 tons of organics per year into compost and mulch. Katie is the policy and membership coordinator at the Farm Bureau. She is with them for a while and would be super excited to have you both here. Go ahead, Mary and Katie.
Thank you so much. We're going to have Katie start off and just give you, set the stage for the state of agriculture in San Diego County right now. So I'm going to pass you over to Katie.
All right. Hello, and thank you for having us. Next slide. So just a brief overview of agriculture in San Diego County. We are just shy of 220,000 acres for the year of 2021. That is a 27% decline in acreage in the last decade. So that's continues to rise. Go to the next slide. Farming has a $1.75 billion impact to our economy. We have the 79-acre farm average with a 4-acre median, meaning most of our farms fall between 1 and 9 acres. According to the 2017 Census of Agriculture, 20% of San Diego farms are operated by women, and at least 25% are operated by minority farmers. Next slide. The standard challenges to farming in the region continue to be high cost of land, high cost of water, labor shortage, and the complex regulatory framework. Next slide. The cost of land has more than doubled in the county in the past 20 years. Next slide. And the cost of water has gone up, continues to go up over 65%. New farmers need educational resources through the local colleges and the UC Cooperative Extension, and they have young farmers and ranchers groups for networking, and existing farmers need a solid labor force and reduce barriers to farm worker housing. Streamlined regulatory requirements are needed to assist our farmers in regulatory issues such as the Ag Water Order, ag chemical restrictions and regulations, general labor, and ag worker housing.
So this is Mary coming on now. So we have some of the key elements for value-added agriculture. And I'd also like to start out by saying there's talk about the barriers, and one of the barriers that I hear pretty consistently has been the high cost of land, that and it kind of stops right there. But one of the concerns that I have when we look at these barriers to getting more farmers in is that there's the people that have stopped farming, that decline that Katie talked about really was because of the barriers that have come up, and specifically the high cost of water. When I first moved to San Diego County and became involved in agriculture, it was in 1979. And one of the very first meetings I went to was a water use meeting. And the farmers there were protesting because if the price of water went from $77 an acre foot of water, which is about 324,000 gallons, to $80, it was going to put them all out of business. And today our growers are paying anywhere from about $1,200 an acre foot for water to $2,000 an acre foot for water. And what that means to our growers is that for a crop like avocados and citrus, avocados use about 3 acre feet of water per year. And so we have to be really, really careful about how we're using water, because that translates into anywhere from $3,000 to $6,000 just for water. It doesn't include things like fertilizer or pest management, weeding, and say harvesting. So it makes it really, really difficult. And so a lot of times when we talk about, not so much with avocados, but with industrialized agriculture, and I think Ellie really hit it on, the nail on the head with this, is that there, in order to provide food, that there have been choices made along the way, and with industrial farming, and in order to be competitive in a global market for providing food, because our farmers really are faced with having to compete against food being produced cheaper in other countries. And so that is an impediment, that choices are made, and using, having larger acreages planted to one crop. One of the ways a farmer reduces his or her expenses is by mechanizing, and the mechanization is really different for different kinds of crops, and it isn't really all that conducive to what we're talking about with the carbon farming, and because it involves tillage. So I think that there's choices and that we have to make in and how we supply an affordable food supply for people. And none of this is very easy to come up with. Next slide, please. So some of the key elements, we're really unique in San Diego County because we have the ability to, with these smaller farms, we have one of the best climates in the world for growing things. And I always like to say, if you can't grow it in San Diego County, you probably can't grow it anywhere. It is a great place to be. But some of the things that would be helpful to our farmers, and we have about 1,400 members, 1,600 members. So we have quite a few members, would be to partner relationships with local vendors. And that can be done through the farmer market system or through local grocery stores, because most people still are going to be buying their food at grocery stores. Based on the high cost of water, due to the high cost of water, being able to set up things like agritourism and have it be have that be a second sort of income for our growers is really a great idea. So some of the examples for that would be like the Carlsbad flower fields, the Carlsbad strawberry farms, and various other agritourism opportunities. And one of the things that we have to be really careful with on that is not putting up barriers. And one of the barriers, that we see are things like the BMT. And, we've worked with the county to say, okay, well, it doesn't make sense if we have agritourism, something like a winery that needs to have a major use permit to have to pay upfront for VMT. And there have been some modifications made in the county regulations. And we really appreciate that. But, initially we're hearing, okay, well, if you have a winery, which definitely helps improve your bottom line, you could have anywhere from a $4 million to a $10 million mitigation fee, $10 million mitigation fee up front just to get permits. And so, we need to really streamline the whole permitting process for these things. And another really great source of that we have growers using are school field trips. So having classes come out and learn about soils. The Carlsbad flower fields does a really great job at this. And it's sometimes the only introduction that kids really get to understand how a plant grows. And so I've participated in leading some of those groups, and it really is very, very satisfying. So next slide. So how can we positively affect climate change? I love the idea of sequestering carbon while producing food. My background is in soils. I love the carbon cycle and all of the opportunity. And again, Ellie, you really hit a lot of this right where it needs to be. And we can sequester carbon while producing food. So one of the things that I love about avocados and citrus is that because they're evergreen, it's an evergreen permanent crop, they're sequestering up to 2 tons of carbon per acre. And that 2 tons of carbon per acre, when you look at the amount of acreage that we've lost with avocados and citrus over the past few years, which is, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 10,000 acres in the past decade, is that 20,000 tons of carbon really is significant when we think about how that affects our community. And it has been nearly 1 million trees. And so it seems like to me like it would be a benefit to the urban sector to say, oh, well, let's keep these trees in and let's figure out what we have to do about the cost of water, because it really is the cost of water that is putting most of our growers out of business. So what can we do about keeping those trees in? Because it doesn't matter if it's an ornamental tree in the city or it's a tree that's sequestering, that it's producing food out in the rural area, it is still sequestering carbon. But the difference is that the government doesn't have to pay for it. So nobody has to put it into their budget for watering and maintenance. And so that is a savings to the urban sector in not having to maintain the trees. And if we could find some way of monetizing that for growers, I think that would be something that would really help offset those high water costs. And again, I know I'm repeating everything you said, Ellie, but sourcing food locally is really important, and we have to make people understand the value in that. And so how do we get people to understand that if something is coming up from Chile, it has a completely different carbon footprint than something that we're producing here locally? Next slide. Improving profitability. Again, the monetary incentive for carbon sequestration would be a big help to growers. We need to work with the proper authorities to stabilize water prices. And it's not, there's another side to the water thing too, is that agriculture is really important in helping in the way our water system has been set up, that if we lose too much agriculture, it really puts a lot of burden on the urban sector to come up with paying for all of the infrastructure that agriculture is actually helping pick up the cost off now. And we have to incentivize those local purchases. So having school districts use local food is super, super important. Having our institutions, our government institutions, using local food local food sources would be a move in the right direction. I know that there was a bill, I don't remember the name of it, that kind of died somewhere along the way last year, but it was really disappointing that it didn't get the momentum that it really needed, so that people understand that if we can't get our public services to use local purchases, it's really hard to figure out how we're going to get the general community to use local purchases of food. Next slide, please. So we also want to make sure that we're providing a safe and secure work environment for employees. We want to have green consciousness on farms, which means using things like fertilizers and chemicals only when we absolutely need to. We need to have living wages, and we really need to reduce barriers for farm worker housing. It's really hard to have farm workers to find the kind of housing that we need where people can work on farms and raise their families. Right now, most of our farmers are complaining that they have a hard time finding people when it's time for things like, labor for harvest. And so if we had better farm worker housing, I think that it would make a big difference. Next slide. I think there wasn't there, oh, it was just a thanks and any questions slide.
Thank you very much, Mary and Katie. Really appreciate your presenting here about how the farming community can be a partner in addressing climate change, particularly what was some of the suggestions you had we can work with, and we wanted to hear a little bit more. For example, about sourcing food locally. You mentioned some examples such as school districts and government institutions. So with the information that you have gathered, could you highlight ideas or suggestions similar to that for action in terms of decarbonizing the food system locally?
So I think that's one of the really difficult things to do, because there's a disconnect between the farmer. The farmer is usually selling through a retailer or a broker. And so there's a few steps difference there. And I think just in business, basically, people are always going to go with the cheapest source. And it's, even though they say, oh, we're going to use local food, they go with the cheaper source. And it goes back, I was looking at the chat where, John, thanks for a great question on why farmers don't raise the price of their products. Here's the dilemma in farming, is that you never know what you're going to get for your product until you sell it. And there's a lot of things that happen along the way. I mean, the growers get the the best prices for their product when there's a disaster in like a hurricane or a freeze or something with their competitors. That's what raises the price of products, or having a scarcity of the product. And it makes it really difficult for a farmer because he has pretty set costs, but doesn't know what they're going to get. And just using avocados as an example, the grower price on avocados has ranged anywhere from, in the past few years, from about $1.25 a pound to $3 a pound. And that's a big difference when you're talking about the return to the grower, because he doesn't, or she doesn't know, the grower will not know what their price is and what their income is going to be until after the fruit is harvested. And a lot of times when we talk about waste in the field, and it's not so much an issue here in San Diego County, but in some of the larger vegetable growing areas, they talk about the food being left in the field. And yes, gleaners sometimes do come in, but the problem to the grower is that if it costs more to pick, cool, and transport than you're going to get for that crop at the point towards the end of harvest, then it doesn't make any sense to pick the crop if it's going to end up in a deficit for you. And that's really the way our system's set up. And it's a bigger problem, I think, than most people realize. It's not that somebody is trying to be wasteful. It's just that it doesn't make sense economically.
Thank you, Mary. So you had mentioned monetary incentives for carbon sequestration, and that's kind of interesting dilemma here in San Diego County, where the county has the largest number of small farms in the entire country. So for a small farmer, how do we make it competitive economically? And if you have any kind of case studies from outside our region or examples of farmers here that have utilized those kind of financial incentives, could you tell us about it?
So there really aren't, I'm not sure what financial incentives you're talking about. Can you explain which financial incentives you're?
I'm talking about carbon, buying carbon credits.
Okay,
yeah.
I've done some research on this, and I'm a little bit confused about it, because what I found was $30, in the neighborhood of $30 per ton of CO2. Is that what you're hearing? So it makes a lot of sense if you've got 1,000 acres of corn that you're putting into no-till ag, and you've got, you're sequestering 3 tons of carbon per acre. But in, like, with the types of crops and vegetable crops that we're growing, avocados, which are probably some of the most efficient carbon sequesters, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 and maybe up to 3 tons per acre. And the problem with that is that when you're paying $1,200 an acre foot for water, which is, say, $4,000 a year, that extra $90 that you get, $60 to $90, it isn't going to make a whole lot of difference. So I'm not sure how we can work that. I'd really love to be involved in that discussion, though, to see how we can make the economics work. I do know, though, that, like when we talk about using like compost for, like, the Marin project and the 100,000 acres that we have of rangeland, that is an opportunity for carbon sequestration. But the problem that we have, again, is that rangeland has a value of somewhere to the grower of $50 per acre per year. And for a grower to buy compost, to transport compost, and to spread compost, and do it at say an inch thick or half an inch thick. I guess the Marin project, I had done my calculations on an inch, which I think is a really reasonable agronomic rate. It was about $3,000 per acre. So how do we get the, using producer responsibility like we do in the electronics industry, get that industry to pay for getting it out there and doing that spreading? And I know that there's some groups like Zero Foodprint that we've worked with that have found a way to kind of monetize the SB 1383 requirements so that growers can take advantage of that.
Thank you, Mary. We're running a little bit over, but I do, if you can very briefly respond to this, because I need to open up the discussion on regional collaboration, and
Okay.
The Farm Bureau is a perfect stakeholder in this question about water. So with the circular economy, there are a variety of stakeholders, including every resident in this region and business and worker. So what potential role do you see the county playing in the context of water, and given the drought and the supply issues, to bring everyone together for regional action?
I don't know how to answer that. I think that's a really I think that's the purpose of getting all the great minds here together, is hearing those ideas. The agriculture uses about 10% of our water. Most of our water is imported, and the vast majority of it is imported from the Colorado River. So, we run out of water, we run out of water, but we also, and that means we don't grow anything. We have very, very little well water here in San Diego County, and most of it's really salty, and it's not acceptable for most crops. So I think it makes it really difficult to try and, the water issue is a huge issue.
Thank you, Mary. Appreciate your time and answering the questions. I think there are several leads here. We're going to follow up with you. Anthony, if you can wait until Dr. Doshi presents, I'll appreciate it. So I have Dr. Ami Doshi. Dr. Ami Doshi is a faculty member at the Fowler College of Business at San Diego State University. Her perspective as a researcher is informed by experiences in biotech, research and development, as well as U.S. Food and Drug Administration, as well as entrepreneurial development at the Kauffman Foundation. Dr. Doshi's current work explores the nexus between innovation, science, and sustainability as they relate to global challenges of climate change, water scarcity, as well as food insecurity. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Doshi.
Thank you so much, Dr. Baksamusa. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me all right. So I guess let's just jump right in. Maybe the next slide, please. So while our focus is on San Diego County, we are fundamentally a cross-border region. So it's really helpful, I think, to just briefly set the stage about what is happening globally, and that also helps us understand best practices thinking. So first, we're facing increasingly complex and intertwined challenges, such as water scarcity, political destabilization and economic turbulence, climate change and population growth. It's been estimated that by 2050, the world's population will reach 9 billion. So given these demographic shifts and changes in consumption patterns that go along with it, there is an escalating need for resources and energy for food production and organized distribution, which then, of course, exacerbates sustainability and environmental ecosystem degradation issues. And the extractive industries really are responsible for the main global carbon emissions, which leads to negative impacts on climate and natural systems. We're also in the midst of a global water crisis, which is worsened by intensive agricultural practices and climate change-induced combinations, seesaw effect of extreme weather and relentless drought. As part of that, we see that key waterways are actually evaporating due to the Earth's hot temperatures, including the Colorado. And so this is having disastrous ripple effects on agriculture, on global shipping routes and supply chains, energy supplies, and even potable water. So again, this is an especially important consideration given our cross-border location and our relationships, right, with our neighbors to the south. We also know from history that vulnerable populations have very few options, right, when they're faced with shrinking water supplies. Environmental degradation and poor governance practices played a critical role in Darfur's, communal conflicts. And a 4-year drought in Syria set the stage for all the violent uprisings over a decade ago, which then were accompanied with mass migrations, right? That's not such an impossible scenario for many parts of the world now. So the safety and sustainability of food systems is a critical building block for global well-being and equity, but it is a system that's under duress. According to a 2022 report by the United Nations, 2.1 billion people worldwide struggle to even get adequate meals each day, and more than 3 billion people are actually even unable to afford a healthy diet. So then when you add the disruptive forces of climate change, COVID-19, and the economic shocks that are affecting the most vulnerable populations, add in a war in Europe, key pillars that would ensure food security, like availability, access, utilization, and stability, those have all been systematically dismantled. And so the scale and interconnectedness of these problems at this point in time means that we need models of collaboration that unite sectors and disciplines, and they foster trust among all the stakeholders that are involved. So we need a mosaic of lenses, if you will, to expand the boundaries of what we can understand and create, because how we perceive phenomena really determines what we perceive. Next slide, please. Thank you. So here, so let's maybe talk a little bit first about what do we mean by circular economy model. So our current linear system of thinking is based on this perceived, this perceived abundance and almost infinite supply of materials and resources and nutrients. But we all know this is not realistic. It's not sustainable, because a linear system is really designed to send materials in one direction, right? Ending either in a landfill or deposited into the environment in a state where it's really hard to recapture and often, has harmful impacts that go along with it. And this is often referred to as the culture of, take, make, dispose. And it's effective when you're extracting new materials from the earth, but it's ineffective when in its ability to recapture those things. So the linear system assumes that our supply of resources is infinite and that the earth can absorb all of our waste. So this is where the elegance and kind of the innate logic of systems thinking really comes into play. Circular economy uses theory and principles from industrial ecology and built on the idea that industrial systems work as natural ecosystems. And so the aims of industrial ecology are to have a closed loop of materials and substances and reduce both resource consumption and also reduce the discharges into the environment. And so by design, circular economy is restorative and it mirrors nature in actively enhancing and optimizing the systems. And so also the rationale for circular systems is based on the reality of resource scarcity, right? Which is a fundamental difference from our linear system of thinking. And it also recognizes the environmental, social, health, and governance problems that come with the extraction of new materials from the earth. So this means that circular economy model thinking is a very promising strategy, right? To address the challenges that affect our planet and support sustainable and regenerative practices. Because the priority of regenerative is to actually push beyond sustainability. And create feedback loops between physical, natural, economic, and social capital that are mutually supportive. And so this regenerative thinking provides structural support to empower marginalized and vulnerable populations. And it creates the conditions that are needed to adapt a new set of values and reorganize in ways that emphasize collaboration and learning, and just as importantly, innovation. And so circular economy models, very similarly are focused on the optimal use and reuse of resources along the entire value chain, from raw material extraction all the way to consumption. So products gain value as they're manufactured, though through the input of materials and labor and energy. Recycling a product captures less value than we would imagine, because it requires energy to do that. And some materials actually break down in the recycling process. So finding ways to reuse a product keeps much of that original value. Now, implementation of circular economy is a very popular paradigm, but it's not always easy to undertake. Because like all other sustainable models, it requires not only innovative concepts, but innovative actors. And by that, I mean, it requires, or implementation requires support from stakeholders who will help to create the conditions for changes in policy and decision-making tools. So, this is something that we assume, but it's not an easy thing. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so even with all of these innovative concepts and cooperative and collaborative actors, we still need to resolve the fundamental issue of how critical elements of a food system, and by this I mean food and water, are economically conceptualized. Cultivated food is fully privatized, and which means that human beings can eat food as long as they have the money to produce it or buy it. So with this, no money, no food rationale, hunger still prevails in a world, of abundance. So in order to provide a sound foundation for a transition to sustainable food systems, the very nature of food as a purely private good has to be reconceptualized and challenged and actually reversed. Food should be viewed as a common good. And so when we use this lens, it allows us to redesign the dominant agro-industrial food system that sees food as merely a commodity. Instead, we want to transition our thinking towards a more equitable and farmer-centric food system, much like my colleagues were speaking about before me. So, already several food-related elements are already considered common goods, right? Fish stocks, agricultural knowledge, right? Food safety regulations, and even things like, hunger eradication and public health, right? So once we embrace the idea that that the commons can be applied to food, we can think about alternative mechanisms to govern its production and its distribution. For instance, maybe a hybrid, like tricentric governance system that's characterized by market rules, public regulations, and collective action. So this, and I guess I could talk more about it, but I'm noticing I only have a few minutes. But this management of common pool resources or natural, it's a classic collective action dilemma. And typically, the governance of these global commons focus on nation states, right, as the appropriate actor for managing these resources or the process. But international cooperation efforts are often punctured by free rider problems, opportunistic behaviors. And so, what we want to do is create something called a polycentric or ecosystems approach which recognizes the fundamental interdependence of multiple interests, multiple institutions, and mechanisms that enable trust, reciprocity, commitment, and it empowers stakeholders to take the actions that are necessary without waiting for governments to make the first move. And the idea here is that rather than concentrating power at global or national levels, authority should be vested in individuals and communities and local governments and NGOs, because they're the ones who can provide legitimate and cross-disciplinary information to policymakers, right, that reflect the reality on the ground, the multi-layered reality on the ground.
And also they have the skills to do what we call, institutional navigation, figuring out, what are sort of strategically, what are the right venues in which to participate? Who are the right stakeholders to speak with and get buy-in? And so again, this is more a shift back to decentralized network of food systems. Next slide, please. Okay. So digging a little bit deeper, this then raises the question of whether the circular economy can actually mitigate resource use and climate change to the extent that it's needed. This offers circular economy, I'm just going to say CE to speak faster. It potentially offers a way to decouple environmental impacts from economic growth, right? This is you generate more profit while reducing environmental impact. So it fits well with this prevailing economic growth narrative. But, this fit with business as usual means that there's a risk that circular economy would basically perpetuate this current state of resource use and climate impact, and maybe even worsen it, right? So we already see this with industries such as, fashion and packaging. So while some of these initiatives for addressing sustainable production are useful and interesting, there is a movement called sufficiency-based circular economy that speaks to consuming less, the importance of consuming less. And so this does not fit with the business as usual modality. And the CE paradigm doesn't exclude this, but by not emphasizing this aspect more prominently, practitioners of this CE paradigm, basically run the risk of focusing on very incremental resource strategies that really fail to mitigate the issues of this predominant industrial system. So the idea here, and if you can see in the pyramid, is that you move from a consumption-oriented society towards a society that's based not only on circular economy, but on sufficiency. And this means it's a society where we manage with, in some cases, much less. It's a mind shift. It's a global mind shift towards having enough for a good life, but without the unnecessary excesses, right, of the modern developed world. And it requires, it's, for instance, equality and fairness across this, society and environment. So the shift is really focusing more on health and well-being rather than monetary incomes. This also fosters an intergenerational perspective, right? The sense of stewardship, right? And rather than short-term thinking. And perhaps most importantly, it really fosters a collective sense of commitment and responsibility. And so this is, again, so I'll move fast. Next slide, please. All right. So most of the economic and management studies that you come across out there on the topic of energy or carbon or financial savings really focus on single food subsectors, right? Like bakeries or dairies or such, or the location, like the United States or the EU. There are not many assessments, unfortunately, of developing countries to help us understand, like, BRICS economies or even those in sub-Saharan Africa. Because this industry is fragmented, right? And what we know is that there are a lot of local assumptions about a given process, even in our county, right? That really drive our understanding of this. And so here, this graphic shows a socio-technical system that characterizes the complex relationships that you find in a global food system, which ultimately impact us as well. The barriers, which are shown in gray, exist at many levels, to kind of diffusing these options that are out there for decarbonizing. But the benefits, which are shown in red, are huge, right? They're vast. And so thankfully, we have financing flows and business models and specific policy mixes, which are shown in orange, that can be harnessed to tackle these barriers as well. One way that business leaders are working to build a more sustainable world and hit these net zero goals is by supporting farmers and ranchers to introduce innovative management policies that prioritize nature as well as agricultural production. There's a project called the New Acre Project, is a model that allows corporations to support farmers financially so they can still invest in adopting nature positive practices into their operations. The corporation basically is paying the farmer to do things differently. And so the farmer doesn't have to lose the income, right? That's kind of the premise of it. Next slide. So I just want to close by offering a lens that, for me at least, gives kind of a universal basis for why this matters. The South African term Ubuntu means humanity. And the concept is often interpreted as, I am because you are. And it's the philosophy that we're bound together in invisible ways, and we must care for those around us and succeed. And we succeed by relying on each other. So if you extrapolate kind of from this core truth, the idea is to build mutually beneficial partnerships among civil society, the private sector, and the public sector. Between farmers, fishermen, family business owners, policymakers, scientists, and the government, so that everyone can succeed, not just incrementally, but we succeed together and exponentially. And that's the end. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Ami, and thank you for grounding us at the end in terms of the circular economy. It is good to remember that we're part of a planetary system, life system, and that there are many interconnected parts in it. I particularly wanted my first question to be focused on a self-sufficient circular economy concept. What we're trying to do and what most climate action databases are kind of around those 3 R's that we talked about, and you added a 4th R. And what does that mean in terms of practically in specific actions that we could add to our database for that 4th R?
Sure. So, I mean, I think my colleagues probably have some better examples, but for instance, things like, carbon farms, regenerative agriculture, we know that undisturbed soil stores carbon, right? So small changes even in how land is managed can make soils into carbon sinks once again. Farmers can use more crop types and also smart farming tools like equipment that uses big data and AI. Another possibility is the use of, or integrating the use of, smart fertilizers. And these are microorganisms basically that are bred or engineered to live in harmony with crops. And they capture nutrients from the environment and provide them to the crops without any waste. Genetic engineering at work. Another area is something that's called precision fermentation. This is using microorganisms to turn sugars and starches into fermented products like beer, wine, even insulin. And now it's even in ice cream. So the idea is that introducing this technology into many products that we would see on store shelves would be great. Another area would be vertical farming. The carbon footprint, as I think my colleagues mentioned before, the carbon footprint of long distance cold storage to transport fresh produce is significant. So there's a whole new generation of vertical farms out there that use energy efficient LED lights to produce year-round crops that are close to home, so you don't have to deal with the refrigeration issue. And finally, there are things like biogas, right, using anaerobic digesters that capture methane as a green natural gas. It's not a pure solution, but it is an interim solution that could be helpful.
Those are way good. That's so many of them. Thank you so much. I just want to kind of highlight that the word, when I said R, it meant refuse, the 4th R.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
And, there's a pun there because refuse is also waste. And we want to kind of move away from the term waste in how I'm reading this, and kind of in terms of a circular economy, there is no waste. If you would want to add anything there in terms of our knowledge base on waste.
I think, I would probably just go back to this whole notion of a sufficiency-based circular economy. Waste becomes an issue when there's excess, right? So part of this is re-educating consumers so that they themselves are, it's a shared responsibility. Industry, corporations have a responsibility, and consumers have a responsibility, and there's an education component for how do you even generate less waste to begin with by a shift in your mindset. And waste that is generated can be reused in the context of a circular economy. But ideally, you keep kind of minimizing it over time so that whatever is generated can be recycled or repurposed in a way that is not harmful to the earth.
Thank you. Very briefly, in terms of, you touched upon alternate ways to govern. We are in this project trying to do regional collaboration, and with each having their own authority, with each governmental agency. So also, given the sectoral nature of a circular economy, there are no silos, but there are also authorities vested in different bodies for specialization, say in transportation, land use, water, etc. How do you kind of see all that interplaying in San Diego, and what kind of a role do you see for the county to play in this?
Great question. So one thing we've learned is that, the most intractable problems of our society, right, as you said, our society's grand challenges can't be explained or resolved through these fragmented approaches, right, that don't draw on multiple disciplines and bypass the interdependence between business and institutions and the physical environment. So, the government sector has a mandate, right, to protect the public interest. And so this polycentric approach, which is, often used in the context of a common pool resource, if we think of the food system as a common pool resource, which I was trying to make a case for, then this is predicated on equal participation and equal value and decision-making power of all these stakeholders, across disciplines, across sectors. So it's a very equitable and decentralized approach to decision-making. So I see the county as having a very significant role in that context, in that framework.
Thank you very much, Ami. And thank you very much to our presenters for today. That concludes our stakeholder presentations for today. I want to remind us that the US EPA tells us that about half of total global emissions of greenhouse gases come from extraction and processing of materials, food, and fuels. And from plastics alone are expected to double by 2060. Local communities, particularly those with environmental justice concerns, they experience environmental and human health impacts of waste more than any others. There were many topics here, particularly with regard to waste and landfill issues that we weren't able to cover, but we will be revisiting this topic later. I wanted to, because I kept Anthony waiting, if you can go forward before I continue with the program, if you can come on audio, Anthony.
Cool, thank you. Really quick, just wanted to address some comments from Mary Matava before. The Marine Carbon Project is now kind of gearing or suggesting around like a 1/4 inch application. So that might cost $500, $1,000 per acre for San Diego's 100,000 acres of rangeland, just as one example. That would still be cost prohibitive, basically billions of dollars. And so one of the only ways forward to transition those acres or implement practices like compost application at scale would be through circular economy. And so I couldn't agree more with what Professor Doshi has been presenting. But basically, I think that it has to be a slightly broader circular economy than is proposed. And so I want to make an analogy to CRV fees for recycled aluminum, let's say. And so, I think some of the discussion here by local procurement and these things, it would be like saying, let's take the, aluminum from the LaCroix can or the Pepsi can, let's keep all those separate in their own separate circular economies, and we'll create these new infrastructures to recycle those. Whereas with CRV fee overall, it sort of like doubles the recycling rate or creates these incentives to finance recycling, but it's aggregated. So there's a 5-cent fee on every can, and then that goes towards the recycling of every can. And so I'm suggesting that we approach the circular economy of food and soil in the same way. Zero Foodprint does this at the city and county level, as well as at the state level. But so introducing extremely nominal and modest fees, essentially, a penny, 5 cents, whatever it might be, that it could be at restaurants, it could be at tourism, that would then fund these kinds of healthy soil practices at scale. Some examples of this are going on in Portland, where there's a 1% fee on corporations over $1 billion in sales with 500,000 per year in Portland. It's the CES fee. I can send links. That generates 120 million a year for renewable energy. A similar fee in San Diego could generate 150 million or more a year for the decarbonization of the food system through healthy soil. There's similar fees being introduced in Hawaii, a $50 per year visitor fee for climate solutions. This would generate $500 million a year for climate solutions. Every solution could be afforded if we could introduce these small fees. I could go on at length.
Thank you so much, Anthony. If you can send us the information as
Sure.
just a reminder. Yeah, thank you. Just email us, chat. All of these are being recorded.
Sure.
And the presentations are being recorded in both English and Spanish channels. We will be posting these presentations publicly as well. So this is going to help us a lot in preparing the implementation playbook. So appreciate all your feedback. So now next, I'll just turn it over. Before I turn it over to Scott Anders, I just want to remind us that Scott is with the University of San Diego's Energy Policy Initiative Center. They are a consultant helping us prepare the implementation playbook for spring of next year. First, on organizational level, which is businesses, governments, or what can we do to address climate change? Second, building up on those actions community-wide, including at a tribal level and a local governmental level. And third, emissions know no boundaries. So we want to identify where is it that we can gain efficiencies by collaborating together at the region. So with that, I will turn it over to Scott to present his thoughts on implementation mechanisms and criteria. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Murtaza, and thanks to the other presenters. Very, very good, inspiring information and comments. So I wanted to provide some context to the materials that were provided prior to the meeting, which included both a list of implementation actions and some criteria for those actions, and also some case studies that we might want to highlight in the playbook. We categorized all actions, implementation actions, into various categories based on the mechanism used to implement. These are the 8 we currently use. So research and analysis, capital project, meaning something's been built or installed, something physical, education and outreach, incentives, collaborating, partnering, developing plans, programs or various programming, and then requirements and policy. And there is a kind of a logic to these categories, or a pathway, if you will. So we often see that analysis, kind of initial analysis, leads to some kind of a strategy or a plan. The plan can include things like capital projects, education, incentives, requirements that then get implemented, monitored, and we can iterate from there. But so these are kind of the elements, if you will, of kind of an implementation logic about how these things might fit together. Next slide. So in the playbook, we've talked about 3 criteria that we would provide information about. Again, kind of some high-level information. It's greenhouse gas reductions, cost, and timeline to complete. And so for greenhouse gas reduction potential, we're talking about the relative reduction compared to other actions. And importantly, when we talk about relative comparison, we're talking about the relative comparison within a particular scale of action. That's what Murtaza presented before: the organization, the community, or the region. So in this case, where we would be comparing the relative greenhouse gas reduction potential of one action versus another, but at the organization level or at the community level, we wouldn't be mixing those actions. And we know that some activities don't have direct reductions like education. So it's kind of difficult to determine what the impact is. Whereas in other cases, there's some methods, there's a literature around things like adding bike lanes, where on average, a mile of bike lane will increase bike ridership by X%. So we can make some estimates around that. Next bullet. So the time to complete, again, we're talking about a relative, one action versus another. And this is the time to complete a discrete action. So develop a program, build a bike lane, install a solar panel. And we know that it's quicker to add a web page than it is to build a bike lane, to continue the example. And then in terms of the cost to implement, again, relative cost. And we know that it's cheaper to, for example, add a web page than it is to build a bike lane. So we're just kind of providing some upfront information on these things as preliminary decision screens, if you will. Next slide. These are preliminary estimates. You could think of them as kind of averages, if you will. So we know that education can range from a page on a website to a full-on regional campaign with commercials. And the cost of that is going to be very different. But we're kind of talking about education in general versus, building projects, capital projects in general, and how those two compare. It's not possible for us to capture all of the possible iterations or examples of a particular category. So we're talking kind of average, and again, kind of intended to be an initial screening for decision making, sort of preliminary estimates. Next bullet. And we also recognize that there are other benefits of these actions. So we're focusing on, the primary focus of the regional decarbonization framework is greenhouse gas emissions, but we recognize that there are other benefits around air quality, environmental quality, public health, but we want to acknowledge that, but the focus of this project is on greenhouse gas emissions. And also, we do recognize in the playbook that there are kind of workforce and equity implications as well. A little harder to score every action in that way, but definitely want to acknowledge those tie-ins as well. And yeah.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I want to turn over to materials that we sent out prior to this meeting. This is a matrix of the food system and circular economy related measures from the EPIC database, which was derived from the climate action plans, as well as from feedback during the first workshop. So we're still working on this matrix. It's available for comment directly under the document review tab on the Engage website. And we invite you to provide comments on either Engage or to email us. Just in terms of the structure, like Scott described, this activity, the implementation mechanism, estimate time to complete, impact on greenhouse gases, and estimated cost on a kind of qualitative scale. So those are the kind of some of the attributes we're looking for. Next. This slide shows a similar matrix at a community scale. However, where the organizational scale has only one subcategory, the community and regional scales have 4. In this case, reduce organic waste, carbon removal and storage, preservation of carbon stocks, as well as capturing methane. And this one shows at a regional scale. It's a little bit difficult to fill out since it's new to folks to think at a regional scale, but we can get there. These actions can have a larger total impact when done at regional scale. The scale has some subcategories at a community scale. So that is, if you can take a look at it and over a week or so, provide us feedback so then we can complete the iterations of this list of actions. So with that, we'd like to hear from you. We want to thank the implementation playbook that is drafted as a result of your feedbacks. And once again, I want to remind the 3 things we're looking for. First, what works or does not work based on your experience? Second, what are the impacts on underserved communities, both positive as well as negative? And third, what are we missing? The types of activities that could include our research and development, implementation planning, financial incentives, policies, workforce training and education research. So with that, wanted to both hear from you about all the material we presented today, and then I'll finally open it up for any comments on overall the topic of food systems and circular economy. If you would like to use the chat function, you can use that and to provide comments. And if you would like to come over the audio, please raise your hands. Whilst folks are thinking about it, I'll just revisit some of the new laws that have come into that will come into play on January 1st. Assembly Bill 1757 would which is addressing the California Global Warming Solutions Act, would require the state to develop achievable carbon removal targets for natural as well as working lands. Assembly Bill 1857 would constitute a new program called Zero Waste Equity Grant Program, which would be a competitive grant program to support targeted strategies and investments in communities transitioning to zero waste circular economy. Particularly, the legislature is interested in job opportunities to improve labor standards and worker pay related to the zero waste job sector. And then Assembly Bill 1985, which would up the organic waste and recover waste organic procurement targets that we already been discussing with the 1383 discussion. These are some of the new bills that are going to effect. And I think that there's a considerable amount of movement on the regulatory side as well. Let me see if there's anybody would want to come on the audio to make a comment. I also want to cover another handout I think we also provided to us. It was a list of case studies that the EPIC team is gathering. They're asking for feedback on case studies and input on other studies you may heard of. If Scott, if you would like to come on the audio to describe any of the material that you already gathered, then folks can begin thinking of something that they may be missing.
Sure. So similarly, we're looking to get case studies in the at the organizational scale, the community scale, and the regional scale. And so in our just initial research, and by the way, I'll say that I would say that this category of food systems and circular economy, we've included probably more suggestions from the working group than any other category. So we really appreciate your feedback, and that'll be seen here as well as you look at some of the examples that we provided. So examples at the organizational level, which could be at the community level, the regional level as well, because of the role of the county. But the County of San Diego's Sustainable, Equitable, and Local Food Sourcing Policy and Program, kind of in development, but that's a kind of a broad policy that's related here. Looking at some of the work by the San Diego Food Alliance, there was some really great resources. Smart Kitchen San Diego, the Save the Food, part of the Save the Food San Diego initiative. There was a case study of the Hilton, recovering food as part of that process. We heard on the last call about making urban trees available for, I guess, upcycling, reuse and upcycling. So there are some interesting things around that as well. At the community scale, several jurisdictions, many jurisdictions in our region have zero waste policies. The County of San Diego has its Purchase of Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, or PACE program. Again, some examples of some of the policies and programs that we wanted to kind of focus on or shed some light on. And in terms of regional, again, a lot of these are from your suggestions from the last call, but, and I think Ellie mentioned it earlier, the Save the Food San Diego website. There was a carbon farming study by the Food Alliance a few years ago. We heard about Sonoma County Zero Food Print. We heard today about the San Diego County Food Vision 2030, Greener by Default, Crop Swap Program, resource recovery parks as a way to facilitate the reuse of materials. And anyway, that's a lot already, but I think you can see based on who's on this call, who was on the call last time, that a lot of these suggestions are your suggestions. So we really appreciate your expertise and the information you're providing us.
Thank you, Scott. Now we are in the open discussion section before we conclude our meeting. And if you have any final thoughts, please raise your hand just like Sean did. And Sean, if you're ready to come on audio, go ahead.
Awesome. Hey, thank you, Dr. B, and really great presentation from the previous speakers. Sorry, I just love the circular economy. And so, you know, those who don't know who I am, you know, I represent 2,000 plumbers and pipe fitters here in San Diego. We're the folks that build your power plants that, you know, seem to be in danger nowadays. And, you know, we look at the circular economy as a great opportunity. You know, one of the good speakers spoke about how our population is growing and how we're going to create more food, right? So, you know, that being said, you know, with that circular economy and processing stations, whether they be microgridded or large plants, depending on what the people decide, you know, they can create items like, you know, liquid, renewable and ammonia and liquid CO2. And then not to mention, we could even talk about utilizing on-site water reuse for farms, right? A lot of great opportunities. So, you know, we just wanted to throw that out there. We're really excited. I think this is a really cool meeting. I'm looking at names and looking at folks, and you know, it's pretty cool to see so many different organizations talking about a circular economy. I mean, if you're going to ask me a year ago where we're at today, it's like a whole new world when it comes to environmental justice and reaching out to all stakeholders. So that's all I want to ask. We're really excited. We believe a circular economy like Scotland has and a zero waste plan is definitely the future, especially when we start talking about the transition of industries, right? If we're talking about genuinely talking about transitioning fossil fuel workers to a new industry of renewable gases, renewable ammonia, in which we can transport hydrogen with long distance, you know, if we're seriously going to have these discussions, you know, this is the place to have them. And, you know, I could probably talk for the next hour about circular economy, but I'll stop. But thank you, Dr. B. This is a great opportunity. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sean. And I do want to emphasize that climate policy and workforce development goes hand in hand in terms of how we address our circular economy and in terms of the success of implementation policies, programs, and pathways. So if there's no more comments, then I'll just wait for a second. Oh, Corey. All right, go ahead, Corey.
Okay, perfect. Hi, I just wanted to add, I put it a little bit into the chat. I'm a little bit mobile at the moment, but yeah, with the city of Fresno, they partnered with their farms. I believe that their water comes from the well. They had similar issues regarding water scarcity and growing the almonds, etc. So they partnered with the city of Fresno. They have on-site water reuse, and I believe when it comes to recycled water and on-site water reuse, you have to dig down a little bit under the soil because it is gray water, and in order to avoid things like mold and diseases and stuff, it goes down, and then you use the land to naturally filter out all of the bad particles, which when it comes to wastewater, there is natural nitrogen and ammonia that comes from, you know, human bodily functions that can also add to the circular economy and the biodiversity of the soil. and regenerating growth that way. And then along with the circular economy, when it comes to like wastewater, organic waste and municipal solid waste, you can take the CO2 and then add it again to the farmland as carbon sequestration, and then it adds to a larger crop yield in the long run, which is better for everybody. But that's my 2 cents. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Corey. I do see some questions and comments in the chat coming in. I want to kind of emphasize that with the purpose of this workshop being to gather input for the implementation pathways, we're going to take all your questions and comments to inform the development of the playbook. And if there's any questions about the decarbonization framework itself, our team will most gladly sit with you, answer your questions, or email you. Please feel free to let us know if you would like us to present, and we will be working with your groups and in trying to get them along. Once again, I want to remind us that in January, we are launching regional convenings. I will turn it over to Michael to describe our next steps.
Thank you, Marissa, and thank you to all the presenters and to everyone who's engaged with this. This has been a fabulous discussion and a lot of specific information shared. So thank you so much for that. Like Marissa said, we're just in closing here. We wanted to share with you real quickly on the slide of our timeline through spring of next year. Our goal is to always, to make sure that we're having a robust engagement and we're including everyone and all voices are heard in regards to the design and implementation of all the actions identified in the discussion. As you will see, the yellow is indicating where we are today. We do intend to have a draft of the playbook for public review by December, so we want to be sure to mention that. In January, we will also be having our regional convenings in partnership with community-based organizations to receive public input on our proposed actions. There will be 5 regional convenings in each supervisorial district. They will include all cities, the unincorporated county and the tribes. So we hope that you can join us for that. Please join us for the regional convenings. A notice will be sent out as soon as we finalize the date, so please look out for that. And finally, we wanted to share that we intend to seek board adoption of the integrated framework in spring of 2023 and receive direction on regional actions. This concludes our second and final workshop in the food system and circular economy working group. Our next working group is on transportation on Thursday, October 27th. If you are interested in attending that, please make sure you've registered if you're not already. And again, we can't thank you enough in terms of participating, and we wish everyone a good afternoon and remainder of the week. So take care. And again, thank you for joining us. And this concludes our meeting. Have a good afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.